Looking forward to starting our Bible class. It's beautiful, almost sunshiny, not quite. Morning. Welcome in. All right, so we're going back to the Old Testament. I love our textual studies, and I won't speak for you, but I think studying the Old Testament is always my favorite. So selfishly, I'm really excited about this. Before we commence any Old Testament study, though, Miss Jean, I'd like to review the books that we've studied so far in the Old Testament as far as the alliterative 2 words, technically 3 with and in the middle, but 2 words of significance that are of alliteration going with each book of the Bible that we study. Let's see how well you remember. I'll be honest, I've already confessed to Miss Jean, there were a couple of them I was a little bit foggy on. I had to go back and make sure. So let's see how many of those we recall. Genesis, what 2 key words? They both start with P's. Very good. Promise is one of them, Paul. What else? Think dads. Patriarchs. Very good. Okay, so patriarchs and promises. Genesis, patriarchs, and promises. Exodus, 2 other P's. You think about Egypt and what God sent on them. Well, Pharaoh, yeah, that's true. Plagues. Plagues and precepts, a synonym for the promises, but I mean, isn't that always true of God? It's promises, 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 right? Okay, so we have plagues and precepts for Exodus, plagues and precepts. Leviticus, think S. People were offering a lot of what? Sacrifices. Okay, sacrifices and sanctity or holiness. That's the theme, and the sacrifices to make one holy, of course, in Leviticus. Sacrifices and sanctity. So that's Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus. Numbers. To me, I feel like this is about the easiest one to remember, and no pressure on that. But M. Think M. People are doing a lot of what through the wilderness? Marching. Good. And as they're marching, what are they constantly doing? Murmuring. There we go. Nice. So through Exodus through Numbers we have marching and murmuring. Marching and murmuring. Deuteronomy, I think, is one of the toughest ones to recall. It can be seen as a little bit drier because you have the guy getting up in front of the whole congregation. He just bores them. He puts them to sleep. What's he doing? I take offense to that. I want you to know. You shouldn't have known that quickly. Preaching. And another side of preaching, it's not just stating what it is, but as well pleading or encouraging to do what's right. So preaching and pleading. Joshua, I think, is a pretty easy one also. To get to the promised land, what do you have to do with that Jordan River? You have to cross it. So crossing, and once you get over there, the real work starts. Conquering. All right, nicely done. So Joshua is crossing and conquering. This is the one I struggled a little bit with, and I shouldn't have. It was pretty recent. Judges, the one's kind of easy. D. No, that's a good guess, though. Not defend. It's defiance, the rebellion. That's the word I was struggling with, defiance. But then after the defiance and deliverance. And it's that cycle, defiance, deliverance. That's Judges. Okay, and that brings us to where we've been, the harmony that we've been doing of 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st, 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles. This one should be pretty fresh to all of us. I'm sorry, yes, sir. No, about when the Israelites will sin, they go into captivity, they're punished for it, and then God raises up the judges who are the deliverers. Yeah, they're the deliverance, yeah. Appreciate the clarification there. Okay, so now our harmony, 1st, 2nd Kings, 1st, 2nd Samuel, 1st, 2nd Kings, 1st, 2nd Chronicles. What are our key ones we've been working on for a while here? We're done with that quarter, but it's a continuation of it, and I'll tell you why. Kings and kingdoms. Nice. Very well said, Shelby. Kings and kingdoms are the harmony of these. Okay, now I want to break these down. We haven't talked about these much. It's a long time ago, but let's go back to these even individually. You can look at them. 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings are largely, not perfectly, but largely chronological. They're going to follow a pattern And then 1st and 2nd Chronicles are a smattering of kind of filling in additional details. So 1st and 2nd Samuel, what's happening with the kingdom? It's not there yet, but boy, it's starting to arrive on the scene. Very, very good. Nice, Brad. Oh, okay, good. Okay. That's still impressive, though. Good job. Take notes. Thanks, Whitley. Good job. Way to steal them, Brad. That's his academic contribution. I stole the right answers. Okay, so emerging, and then the kingdom expands. The emerging of the kingdom and the expanding of it. It's 1st and 2nd Samuel. We have 1st and 2nd Kings. As it's expanding or rising, it's going to reach its zenith. It's going to get capped. Cresting, okay? So it's going to stop there, and there's only one way down. Crashing. That's what we have with 1st and 2nd Kings. The kingdom crests, and then it crashes. Okay, now, remember, it's largely chronological, and that's why, for the most part, we do 1st, 2nd Samuel, 1st, 2nd Kings, and then we mix in some Chronicles along the way. So with 1st and 2nd Chronicles, we're adding details, but we're really focusing on what main person, what main Old Testament person. The Jews love him, and we're well past Abraham. No? David. Good. It's all about David and his dynasty, okay? So 1st and 2nd Chronicles are David and dynasty. It focuses basically exclusively, other than the first early part of 1st Chronicles, on the Judah, or the southern side of the kingdom. Speaking of which, our previous Old Testament quarter dealt with kings and kingdoms from what perspective? The kingdom what? United. Any guesses as to what we have now? Kings and kingdoms divided. Yes, and we left off where we're really cresting. And who's been reigning as king in 1 Kings 9 up to this point? For a while now, about 20 years. Who's been reigning as king? Not David, but David's son, which Gene has pointed out to us, and Justin confirms. That's Solomon. Solomon's been reigning as king. And the first title of this section that we're going to cover is From Glory to Shame. From glory to shame. And thankfully today we get to deal with that glorious side. The kingdom has emerged. The kingdom has expanded. It's explosively grown under the reign of David. It continues to expand its influence under the reign of Solomon for a good about halfway, maybe even more of his reign. But then the kingdom becomes capped. It crests. There's only one place to go from there. So let's pick up in 1 Kings. We're in chapter 9, and we're going to start reading in verse number 10. Now, it happened at the end of 20 years. End of 20 years of what? Well, we're told if we continue in the verse. When Solomon had built the 2 houses. What 2 houses? I love God and his mind, the way it works. He knows we're going to be asking. He says, okay, remember these 2. The house of the Lord, the temple, and the king's house, the palace. A couple of things here. Does anybody recall through that 20-year span how long is spent building priorities? Priorities first, and we have the temple coming before. How long does it take to build the temple? Of that 20-year span? 7. Good. And we could get a little more exact. I believe it's in the end of chapter 8, if I'm not mistaken. So not far back from where we were, that it's exactly like 7 and a half years, 7 years, 6 months. But yeah, we usually hear it that way, and 7 years. And so what would that leave for the second project then? I know it's not math class, but this is like first part of 2nd grade maybe, so I think we can get... that's what makes you scared. It's the easy ones. In golf, it's the 3-footers that makes you nervous, right? The straight 3-footers. So, but yeah, it's 13 years. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yes, his own, and the palace. Yeah, right. Okay, good. Paul says, is this his own house or his wife's? We're getting to that, right? Yeah. We are getting to that for sure. So about 13 years to construct his. Now, this could be seen as maybe a little bit selfish. Why would you only take 7 years on the house of God and then 13 years on your own? I don't know that it's intended to be that way. And I think there's a reason that it only took 7/7.5 years to build the temple. Why did it seem to go so quickly, do you think? I know that doesn't sound very fast, but when you're working in that time doing what they're doing, Okay, good. So it could have been a little longer time in the taxation side of things, the finances. Okay, I think that makes sense, and in part because, you know, he's milking the cow dry here, and I think that's a little bit of a dangerous thing we're going to find in the next reign after Solomon. Good, yeah, really good points. Go ahead, Paul. There you go. Probably the workers, yeah, a lot more hands on deck for that's one thing. And the other side of things, and when this goes back to the finances, Marty, but I would say maybe in addition to the finances, in appendix to that, who's helped him? Who's not around anymore, but who's helped him? Yeah, his dad made extensive preparations for this, years, gathered all the supplies, and had drawn out the blueprints, and you know the preparation stage of anything. It's kind of like the dreaded research paper. The worst part of it, it's getting started and just organizing your thoughts, and you kind of get rolling, you know, once you do that. But it's the same thing when you're building something, and so he has so much help, and I think that's why the time frame's less than what it was. Point being this, I don't think it's a criticism against him that it takes 13 years to build his, almost double the time of the other, and in fact, you might even look at it in a roundabout way as a compliment. From glory, so let's talk about this glorious reign of Solomon further than what we already have up to this point. Verse 10 again, it happened at the end of 20 years. It's the construction if I can say it correctly, the construction projects, there we go. Don't want to contract those. At the end of these 20 years, when Solomon had built the two houses, the house of the Lord, the temple, and the king's house, the palace, Hiram, king of Tyre, so here our places get mixed in right off the bat, had supplied Solomon with cedar and cypress and gold, as much as he desired. What a great friend to have. That King Solomon gave Hiram 20 cities. That's impressive. In the land of Galilee. So let's look at our map now. Let's discuss where we are and what exactly is going on. Solomon's found where? Where's Solomon? Where's he living? He's in Judah, and let's narrow it down. What city? Yeah, the capital, right? Remember how David has moved it from Hebron to Bethlehem? And that's I would say probably orange. Am I right there? I'm not really great with colors. I'm a guy. So I think that's orange, or maybe a red orangish on the map. Not the orange, but the red/red orangish below that. And so that's Jerusalem. That's where the dot is. Now, Hiram, he's an ally in this. Hiram is a king, not of the people of Israel, but he's a king where? What city, state? Tyre. See Tyre on the map? I know that's kind of small, and you might be aware already. Tyre and Sidon, those are areas up to the northwest of the territory of God's people, and the big letters of Phoenicia. You see that up there? And maybe you can locate Tyre. It's on the northeastern seaboard of the Mediterranean, the Great Sea. So there's this buddy called Hiram, and he's up there, and he is aiding Solomon in all of these building projects. He's providing wood for him, cypress and cedar, which is abundant up in that area, shipping it down. And then also much gold is coming to him from this area. Well, if you have a guy who's such a good friend, you want to let him know how much you appreciate what you're doing. So Solomon decides to grant him, he just gifts over to him 20 whole cities in the land of Galilee. Where's Galilee? And we don't have that labeled on the map. That's up to the north, isn't it, of where Solomon is. It's going to be to the southeast of where Hiram is in Tyre. And so if you'll go west from the latitude of the laser beam, you're going to see, and that little lake right up there, that's the one that doesn't exist anymore. We'll probably talk about that more in a geography class when we get there. Today you're not going to find that. It was drained because of mosquito problems and malaria that was being spread about 50 to 70 years ago. But in Bible times, that was a little lake that was found right there. So the larger of the two that are really close together, just directly across due west from where I'm pointing right there, that's the Sea of Galilee. And these cities are scattered in this territory of Galilee. 20 whole cities that you get. What would you do with 20 cities and all that land if it was given to you? Wow, what a gift, we would think. But as we continue on, Hiram doesn't think the same way. Verse 12. Then Hiram went from Tyre, so up here in Phoenicia, northwest of the Bible lands. He went from his territory, a city-state over which he ruled Tyre, to see the cities which Solomon had given him, but they did not please him. Well, this guy doesn't sound like a very good friend. 20 whole cities, and you're not content with that? Time out. I think there's a little more to it than this. Keep your spot here. Turn to Isaiah, the 9th chapter. Isaiah 9. And we'll actually get to this in our next, strangely enough, New Testament Luke class. We didn't quite get to it on Wednesday night, but there's a New Testament prophecy that's made going back to Isaiah 9. Isaiah 9, in the first couple of verses, one especially for us today. But there will be no gloom for her who was in anguish. In the former time, he brought into contempt, it was hated or looked down upon, the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. Now that's going to be up in this area where these 20 cities are gifted to this king. And God says that this was once a land of contempt, but in the latter time, in biblical lingo, that's a reference to the Jesus/church age. Jesus is going to make this place special. Now, we're not going to get into why in this class. We'll deal with that in Luke, but it's just a prophecy that's made of the Christ. But in the latter time, he has made glorious the way of the sea. That is, the land beyond the Jordan. That is, Galilee of the nations, or of the Gentiles. And again, we'll talk about that, included with verse 2, whenever we get back to Luke here in a couple of weeks. But for now, I just wanted to point out that this was considered to be a land of contempt. It's not that great. We know that's a little bit of a contrast with so much of the promised land. It's described as a land that flows with milk and honey. I think the reference is this, to the fertile farmland that's found in some of the valleys and some of the plains. But we also know about this area, and especially as you head up north, what happens with the terrain. This area down here, this area down in this spot is more hilly. It's kind of like the Boston Mountains in Arkansas, a little more than what we have in the Ozarks here. But you get up to the north, you have Mount Hermon, or Hermon, depending on how you pronounce it, and you're looking at an elevation of like 9,000 feet. It actually becomes quite mountainous, and it's very rocky. And I believe what happens here is that Solomon gives Hiram the land that he and nobody else really cares that much about, really wants anyway. It's part of it. There's more too. Joe? Extremely firm when you're dealing with that, right? It's like rock hard. Yeah, good point, Joe. So for those who might not have heard, he's talking about perhaps even volcanic rock is found in that area. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. It's just not good for a whole lot. Also, it's called Galilee of the Gentiles, an Israelite territory, for a reason. There are large concentrations of Gentiles that still live there. I don't believe that the children of Israel ever fully finished off maybe defeating this area, or maybe whenever they're running people out, they would go to this, and they didn't really care too much about finishing off, which is the opposite of what God told them to do, right? But so this is like an underdeveloped area, not very fertile, not very good for farming, and basically what he's done is he's given him worthless territory as it stands right now. Verse 13 of our passage. So he, that is Hiram, said, "What kind of cities are these which you have given me, my brother?" I mean, he's not like fighting mad. This isn't going to be war over this. And actually, this shows the close relationship that the two of these enjoyed. And this is common terminology for diplomacy in this era. They would call each other things like that, endearing terms like my friend or my brother. And so again, they're not going to fight over this, but he's not really satisfied with his gift that's been offered to him. And he called them, I believe that's Hiram probably, of whom the speaking is being done. He called them the land of Kabul, as they are to this day. A couple of things here. I ask you to turn over to the parallel to this, 2 Chronicles chapter 8. We won't do this just a ton this morning, but we will a few times. 2 Chronicles 8, verses 1 and 2. Again, remember 1st and 2nd Chronicles being additional information, supplying some details. Verse 1, 2 Chronicles 8. At the end of 20 years, in which Solomon had built the house of the Lord, temple, and his own house, the palace. Sounds familiar, right? But notice in verse 2, Solomon rebuilt the cities that Hiram had given to him and settled the people of Israel in them. Now, what cities do you think these are? Yeah, it would make a lot of sense. The cities of Kabul, the ones that were never finished off by the Israelites anyway. And it also seems to suggest that Hiram, being displeased with this gift, what did he do with it? He says, you know what? Let's just deed these right back over to you. How does that sound? He didn't even want them. And then Solomon, maybe he recognizes, well, these things aren't even valuable right now anyway. We need to fix the infrastructure in this area, and maybe it helps to make them a little more valuable. I'd like to tell you more about Kabul, although we don't know a whole lot. The meaning of it, like a lot of our Hebrew words, is unknown, but that sounds a lot, in fact, exactly like, you ever heard of Kabul today? And that's only about 10 miles east. This area is, this describes only about 10 miles east of modern-day Kabul, so I think the name has stuck. And I also got to thinking about where I grew up, Mountain Grove. You're heading east on 60 Highway. After Mountain Grove, what comes next? Kabul. I imagine probably the name spelled a little bit differently comes from it. Anyway, I thought that was kind of interesting. Makes a lot of sense, too. We always gave people from Kabul a pretty hard time. So I'm sure this is a term of derision, whatever the meaning is. So we're continuing on in verse 14. Then Hiram sent the king 120 talents of gold. You do the calculations and you convert that over, and you're looking at 4.5 tons of gold. I believe that's additional gold. Their relationship's not in disrepair. It's just a gift that he's not really that interested in. But the giving and the exchange, the camaraderie between the two is going to continue. Verse 15 of 1 Kings 9. And this is the reason for the labor force which King Solomon raised, to build the house of the Lord, his own house, the Millo, talk more about that in a moment, the wall of Jerusalem, Hazor, Megiddo, and Gezer. Before we get into those 7 building projects listed here, let's describe the labor force. The labor. Does that sound fun to you? And I'd love to say, well, this is like our labor force where I don't think this is exactly what's in mind. Rearrange the words, force or forced labor, and that's better. That doesn't sound quite as fun. I found interesting the Hebrew term for this. The Hebrew word is Hamas. Does that sound familiar? The Islamic terrorist organization. People associated with them, as in like made to be associated with them, usually aren't very happy about that arrangement. They like to force their will, or try anyway, upon others. I'm going to guess that probably that term comes from the ancient Hebrew word for forced labor, Hamas. So I thought that was intriguing also. There are 7 pieces listed of this building project. This is the reason for the labor force of which King Solomon raised. 2 of these we've covered. To build the house of the Lord, the temple, his own house, that's the palace complex. The Millo, what's that? What's the Millo? Have any other translation there? Okay. Yeah, right. It's strange. The term's just strange. But the meaning of this, and could be translated, I kind of wish it was, so it makes some sense to us, is rampart or a raised area for defense is the concept. It means rampart or mound, and this was a part of the fortifications of Jerusalem. It's according to James Strong in defining the term. And so this is the raised area that's going to help fortify the city, serve as a strategic stronghold. The wall of Jerusalem, the 2 of which may go together. And then 3 cities. So those 4, and then 3 cities. Hazor, Megiddo. Oh, wow. Of extreme biblical significance, Old Testament and New. And then also Gezer. So let's look at these places on the map. And again, I don't know how well they'll shine through. But if you look farther up from the Sea of Galilee, the little tiny body that was once there, Hazor is just to the west, basically due west of that. So on a line right here, just go straight across, and you're going to see Hazor. Megiddo is down to the southwest of that. So if you'll go from where I am on over, might be able to see Mount Carmel up to the northwest. That's where Megiddo is found. And then Gezer, for that you're going to head basically due south of Megiddo. And that's going to be, as you go back onto the screen, that's where Gezer is found. If you'll notice, that's in the northeastern side of the territory of old Philistia. Okay, I think that's a relevance also as we move forward. 7 major building projects that are listed here. As we continue on, verse 16, Pharaoh, king of Egypt, had gone up. Pharaoh, we know from where he comes. Let me give a different map for this one. And if you look on this one, you're going to see, of course, the large country of Egypt. You know, the Nile River that goes through the delta that empties into the Mediterranean Sea, flowing from south to north. And so if you look from here, you'll notice that, yes, Pharaoh had to go well up to the northeast, right around and even farther up than Gaza. You'll find in the green on the map. He had traveled. Pharaoh, king of Egypt, had gone up and taken Gezer. So let me go back to our other map now so we can see Gezer in the northeastern portion of Philistia. And he had burned it with fire and had killed the Canaanites who dwelt in the city. So this wasn't the land of Israel, right? This is the land of the Philistines. And Pharaoh had a part in going in and help taking this over. And he had given it as dowry, a wedding present, to his daughter, Solomon's wife. Well, that is a thoughtful, sweet, kind dad, isn't it? He goes into enemy territory, and he kills the people in it, and he burns the city down. He says, here you go, my lovely daughter, this is for you. That's a sweet dad for sure. Verse 17, Solomon also built Gezer, Lower Beth-horon, Baalath, and Tadmor in the wilderness, and these places aren't going to be located on our map, but we're told that they are found in the land of Judah. The cross-reference to this in 2 Chronicles mentions, as is insinuated, there's also an upper Beth-horon, but just the lower one's mentioned right here. Verse 19, all the storage cities that Solomon had, cities for his chariots and cities for his cavalry, and whatever Solomon desired to build in Jerusalem, oh, he loves to build, and Lebanon, and in all the land of his dominion. I wonder if Solomon's as obsessive as what some of us are. You know, once you start something, it gets on your mind and it consumes you. Well, he starts building in his reign. He builds the greatest worship structure perhaps ever constructed up to this point in the Temple of Israel. Then he builds his enormous palace. He spends half of his reign doing this. Well, then what do you do? Well, let's build this and let's build you know, he's a builder and he has this on his mind. Maybe he's a little obsessive. And whatever he wants, he builds. I ask you to go back in 1 Kings to chapter 4. 1 Kings 4. We're going to be reminded of something that we encountered earlier. 1 Kings 4 in the 7th verse. It mentions here, Solomon had 12 officers over all Israel who provided food for the king and his household. Each had to make provision for 1 month in the year. And if you'll notice, they're found kind of throughout their location. And as we go back to our text, that could provide some additional information as to why Solomon's building up all these places all over. It might not just be to house like military things themselves, but as well those who are in charge of special operations within his administration. So back in our passage, 1 Kings 9:20, all the people who were left of the Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, who were not of the children of Israel, that is, their descendants who were left in the land after them, whom the children of Israel had not been able to destroy completely, and we understand why. That could only be because of their unfaithfulness, you know, in different spans. From these, Solomon raised forced labor as it is to this day. Okay, a couple of things. Keep your spot. Turn to Deuteronomy 20. Deuteronomy 20. Solomon's careful. When he raises Hamas, or forced labor, he doesn't subject any Israelites to it. He does, however, subject the enemy nations from this place, those whom the Israelites had not destroyed. Look in chapter 20 of Deuteronomy, beginning in verse 10. God had taught this concerning warfare. These are his laws regulating it. When you draw near to a city to fight against it, offer terms of peace to it. Well, why not have peace if you don't have to have war? And if it responds to you peaceably and it opens to you, then all the people who are found in it shall do forced labor for you and shall serve you. And he goes on to say, if they don't agree to make peace, well, you have the right to attack them and to destroy them. That's okay. So Solomon has the right to do this with enemy peoples, nations, kind of. Now let's go down into verse 15 of the same passage. Thus you shall do to all the cities that are very far from you, which are not of cities of the nations here, as in the promised land. But in the cities of these peoples that the Lord your God is giving you for an inheritance, you shall save nothing alive that breathes, but you shall devote them to complete destruction, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, as the Lord your God has commanded you. Now, first of all, God said it, period, end of story, but as God often does, he explains his rationale. Verse 18, that they may not teach you to do according to all their abominable practices that they have done for their gods, and so you sin against the Lord your God. The reason I'm telling you this is because your spirituality and that of your children and your grandchildren and all the generations after them is at stake. In this land, these rules, I'm telling you, do not apply. You don't go in here and offer terms of peace to them. You don't try to spare all of them. You kill everyone that's found. This is divine retribution for these nations' sins. And he says, if you don't follow my instruction, but instead you make terms of peace and you say, oh, well, come on, we'll put you into forced labor, the nation is going to be torn apart if you do this. Store this away in your mind for down the road. Back in our text, 1 Kings 9. All the people who were left, they shouldn't have been left, but they were, of the Amorites, the Hittites, Perizzites, Hivites, Jebusites. From these, verse 21, Solomon raised forced labor, Hamas, as it is to this day. Continued on for many years after the division of the kingdom. Verse 22, but of the children of Israel, Solomon made no forced laborers, because they were men of war and his servants, his officers, his captains, commanders of his chariots, and his cavalry. Why doesn't he raise Hamas from among the children of Israel? I mean, he's a powerful guy. He can do it if he wants. You recall God's Old Testament rules about this? You can do it from the enemies, and you conquer them in war and peaceable terms, but they have no right to enslave their own brothers and sisters. And only if they would agree, and only for a short span. You have the year of Jubilee and the releasing and all of that, and after 6 years as well, whichever one would come first. So he seems very concerned about following the law of God on this side, but you're starting to see some inconsistencies. He's not quite as concerned about following the law of God on this side as well. Verse 23, others were chiefs of the officials who were over Solomon's work. 550 who ruled over the people who did the work. This is your verse, Paul. But Pharaoh's daughter came up from the city of David to her house. Notice, not to their house or to his house. She gets her own house. That sounds like a happy marriage, doesn't it? Why does she get her own house? Okay, that would make a lot of sense. She's probably still serving her own gods. That's a good memory. Yeah, absolutely. So she's from her own people, and she has probably still her own gods, her own way of doing things. She's an unclean person. She's a Gentile, and to bring her into the presence of the clean God and where all the sacrifices have been and are being given, it wouldn't be appropriate. God has said, separate yourselves from the unclean. And again, maybe this is some inconsistency on the part of Solomon. It's like, well, there's no issue with my being married to her and having relations with her, and we won't live in the same house. So I don't know, But anyway, so she has her own house, okay? Then he built the millo. Remember, that's the rampart, the mounds, the defense fortification. 25, now 3 times a year, Solomon offered burnt offerings and peace offerings on the altar which he built for the Lord, the divine number for the divine one. And he burned incense with them on the altar that was before the Lord, so he finished the temple. King Solomon also built a fleet of ships. I mean, he's just dabbling his hand in everything. If it's building, give him a Lego set. He's happy. He's a boy at heart. Oh, cool. Let's build ships at Ezion Geber. And we're going to have to get the new map on this one. So Ezion Geber goes down to the northeastern side of the Sinai Peninsula. And it's at the very southeastern corner of that green territory, if that helps any. Shows some Assyria's influence there. And Elath right beside that. So that's where he builds this fleet of ships, and as you can tell, that's on the Red Sea. And on the northwestern arm, that's the Gulf of Suez, the Suez Canal now that connects to the Mediterranean Sea, so you don't have to go all the way around South America, the dangerous Cape Horn. And the northeastern side of the Red Sea is the Gulf of Aqaba. The Gulf of Aqaba, or back then the Gulf of Aden, Gulf of Aden's down here, but the Gulf of Aqaba. And so that's the area in the northeastern side of the Red Sea where they're testing out these ships. And as is mentioned here, which is near Elath, on the shore of, there we go, the Red Sea in the land of Edom, and that's basically due south of the Promised Land. Then Hiram sent his servants with the fleet, seamen who knew the sea, to work with the servants of Solomon. These guys are just hand in hand. They're a great tandem, it seems like. Here's what they're doing, verse 28. And they went to Ophir and had acquired 420 talents of gold from there in the mines and brought it to King Solomon. That's 16 tons of gold. I mean, the money is flowing during the reign of Solomon. They're going out, and they're exploring all over, and they're mining for these precious materials. Ophir, as you might be able to tell, that's basically due east, well, not quite due east maybe from Egypt, but due east from Cush, as you can see there. And this is eastern Africa. This is a rich place for minerals. And, of course, in the area of water, you often find abundant supplies. And then if you go across from that, just across the Red Sea there, from Ophir, you see many believe, the location of Sheba. And that's going to come into conversation now in chapter 10. Let's cover about first 13 verses there. 1 Kings 10, verse 1. Now when the queen of Sheba, okay, this is territory on the Arabian Peninsula, believe, we don't know 100% for sure, but it's thought to be from there. When the queen of Sheba heard of the fame of Solomon concerning the name of the Lord, she came to test him with hard questions. She came to Jerusalem with a great retinue. It's a large royal posse with camels that bore spices, very much gold. Oh, Solomon's going to like this. And precious stones. And when she came to Solomon, she spoke with him about all that was in her heart. By the way, it's incredible the distance she was willing to travel to go just to talk to him and to give him this gift. The travel would have taken her about 1,500 miles. Now, can you imagine traveling across that difficult, unforgiving terrain, 1,500 miles just to go see this guy and his kingdom? And it's because of everything she's heard. Like, oh, there's no place like this on earth. There's no one like this on earth. And she's heard this for years. Everyone, all right, fine, I'm going to go see for myself. She travels 1,500 miles to see what in the world's going on over in this kingdom with his man. So Solomon answered, verse 3, all her questions. There was nothing so difficult for the king that he could not explain it to her. And when the queen of Sheba had seen the wisdom of Solomon, the house that he had built, the food on his table, the seating of his servants, the service of his waiters and their apparel, his cupbearers, and his entryway by which he went up to the house of the Lord, the temple, there was no more spirit in her. This guy, we're going to find out next week, has a way with the ladies. He loves ladies. Ladies seem to love him also. You have any other translation of, there was no more spirit in her when she saw him, his kingdom, and all of his way of life, and how smart he is, and probably like dad, good looking. Go ahead. There you go. He quite literally took her breath away. He has this effect on the ladies. The ladies love Solomon, and he loves the ladies. Keep that in mind. Verse 6, then she said to the king, It was a true report, which I heard in my own land about your words and your wisdom. You know, you hear about the legend, the man, the myth, and that's what people think about this when they hear about Solomon and his kingdom. There's no way it could be as it's described to us. And that's all everyone hears day after day, year after year. Finally, this woman says, I'm going to travel the 1,500 miles it takes, and I'm going to go see for myself. And who would like to state the remainder of her conclusion, our memory work? 1 Kings 10:7. 1 Kings 10:7. Paul? Isn't that something? Don't want to meet your heroes, right? You're always going to be disappointed. Well, if this is a hero that's been built up in her mind, you'd think, I'm going to go, and it's not going to be anywhere near anything I was told. Once she goes and sees and experiences, she hears all of this for herself, she said, half the story hadn't been told to me all these years. Quite literally, her breath, Joe, is taken away from her. She continues in verse 8, happy are your men, and happy are your servants. So it's not just like, you know, a lot of times you'll see this ruthless dictator, and man, that dude's living the life, and his family and everyone's miserable. They hate him. They're just looking for ways to overthrow the regime, to replace him. Everyone's happy in this place. Happy are your men. Happy even are your servants who stand continually before you and hear your wisdom. And here's the best part about it. She understands why. Blessed be the God, the Lord your God, who delighted in you, setting you on the throne of Israel, because the Lord has loved Israel forever. Therefore, he made you king. And what's so impressive is you're not this crooked, corrupt ruler that I encounter all the time. You do justice in righteousness. It's almost like she sees heaven on earth, the way God drew it up. Country's operating well. Glorious is the nation of Israel. Verse 10, then she gave the king 120 talents of gold, 4.5 tons of gold as a present, spices in great quantity, and precious stones. There never again came such abundance of spices as the queen of Sheba gave to King Solomon. Also the ships of Hiram, which brought gold from Ophir, brought great quantities of almug wood. I'd love to tell you what that is, but I'm not 100% sure. It's kind of like gopher wood. Something that's handy for building, that's for sure. And precious stones from Ophir. So it's not just the gold, but it's also additional wood and precious gems. And the king made steps of the almug wood for the house of the Lord, temple, for the king's house, palace, also harps and stringed instruments for singers. There never again came such almug wood, nor has the like been seen to this day. And in return, verse 13, now King Solomon gave the queen of Sheba all that she desired. Whatever she asked. I'll ask you for next week. Hang on to this. Solomon has a way with the ladies. The ladies love him. He loves the ladies. I'm not suggesting anything here between him and the king of Sheba on a level of intimacy. But the point being this, he kind of makes a policy for the ladies, whatever they ask, whatever they want, anything, I'll give that to you, whatever it is. And so he does the same thing for the queen of Sheba, besides what Solomon had given her according to the royal generosity, or in addition to the gifts. I mean, what's it matter? They have so much anyway. It's stated, and I believe it's next week, we're going to find that silver, very precious metal now, and much more so than in Bible times, was like stones in Israel. So she turned and went to her own country, she and her servants. It's a glorious time among the children of Israel under Solomon's reign. The country reaches her zenith. She crests, and there's only one place to go from here. And that's going to have a lot to do with the love and marriage and a whole bunch of it that we're going to start to find next week. Any closing comments on what we discussed in 9 and partway through 10 in our new Kings and Kingdoms Divided series? Okay? For next week, if you will, I would ask you to read the remainder of chapter 10, the remainder of 1 Kings 10. Let's go ahead and go into chapter 11 and into the 8th verse there. And as a memory verse, I would like for us to store away. Let's do verse 2 of chapter 11, 1 Kings 11:2. Okay. Any closing comments? Thank you.